Hey everyone, this is my 2016 Chevy Volt, the Gen 2 edition. And in this video, I'm going to show you how I'm going to fix my air conditioning. The air conditioning hasn't been blowing cold for about a year and a half now. What I found was there was no refrigerant in the system. So I'm going to do this video actually in two parts. In the first part, I'm going to show you how I went from nothing in the system and used the vacuum pump to fully charge it from the ground up. And so that will be the first part of the video. Then the second part will come back and do a recharge on it. So if you're watching this video and you know you have some pressure in your system, but it's just not blowing as cold, you can skip to the part later in the video where I just do a recharge based on the pressures. So stay tuned and see how I did it. So the issue that I have is that the AC system is no longer working. It's no longer producing cold air. Not only that, but in this particular car, the check engine light is on and it actually is producing a code. And when I looked up that code, it is in fact that the AC refrigerant is low. Well, I don't know why. I've never heard of a car producing a code before because of the AC refrigerant being low, but my guess is that because it's an electric compressor and it may be used also for the battery cooling, that may be why it's a code. But at any rate, I want to get this fixed because it's also going to be getting hotter in the summer here, and I want to get this the AC working again. So the first thing I did to diagnose this was bought a gauge set here, and this is from Vevor, and I'll have a link to the tools in the description here. But this is just a 3-way cheapo gauge set here. To start off, I took the gauges and I made sure I connected, especially my red and blue lines to each side. I also tightened these knobs in clockwise to close them. And if you see the little thing on here, it says closing it is clockwise, opening it is counterclockwise, just like a normal faucet would be, right? Then on the other side, I located right behind the air cleaners where the high side was, and I took off the cap to it right here, and I attached my little adapter and then my line to that. And so the way you do these is, these actually have a valve on it. Notice it's the reverse. Opening it is tightening it. Closing it is actually loosening the screw. The reason that is because what this thing is like there's inside of there's like a Schrader valve. If you're not familiar with a Schrader valve, you really are, because that's what is on kind of a tire thing. It has this little pin inside here, and if you push it in, just like how you let the air out of a tire, that's how you connect and can check the pressure on the AC system. Very similar thing here. So when I start tightening this thing, it's actually pushing down onto the Schrader valve and opening it up. So all the way out, loosened, would be closed. So right now everything is closed, and of course the blue one is down in here. I don't know if you can see that. And the way you get to this is you take this hose, this rubber hose off there. I just loosened the hose clamp and just pushed it out of my way, and that gave me enough room to reach down in here and get that on. And basically you just clip these on by lifting up on that and pushing down on them, and then make sure they're secure, they don't lift off, and then you can tighten this down. So at the moment everything's closed, and of course everything is reading 0. So on the gauges, or where you're looking at here, is you have this PSI, which is this outer black writing here. And you see it's at 0. You can actually see it can go to negative. So it actually can detect reverse pressure, which is vacuum, on the low side. And then the high side, same thing. It's the outer black. And notice that we're at 0. Now what should happen is, I'm going to leave these tight and closed, and then I'm just going to open my valves here. And I've already done this before, so opening them by tightening them in, which should open up the Schrader valve and let the pressure into the hose. So I've done that on both. By the way, you should wear gloves with this just in case any refrigerant sprays out. I will, but I already know that the system is pretty much empty. So once I tighten them in, I'm looking at my gauge and there's still 0. So this tells me that not only our refrigerant's low, it's gone. So I most likely have a leak, which is why I didn't want to buy one of those $40 recharge cans, because it would have done no good for me. So now that I know that there's no pressure in the system, now I've got to look at pulling a vacuum and determining where that leak is. So that's why I purchased a kit that not only came with the gauges, but it also came with the 4CFM vacuum pump, and this is from Vevor. So the next step I'm going to do, because I know that the system is empty, is I'm going to pull a vacuum on it and look at and let it hold there for a while. And I should see, if I pull it down to -30, which is way down here, I should be able to wait and see what happens after like a few hours. So this is the vacuum pump. So I've got the yellow line connected to the vacuum pump here and then to here. Again, these are closed off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start up the vacuum pump, and then I'm going to open both of these valves. Again, these valves have nothing to do with the gauges. The gauges will read whatever pressure is in these red and blue hoses. These valves, what they do is they open it up to allow connection between the yellow and the red or blue hoses. So when I initially turn it on, it's just going to be creating a vacuum in this hose here. But then when I open these valves, that vacuum is going to start pulling out of the red and blue lines from all, basically it's pulling vacuum out of all three lines. So it'll pull vacuum out of both the high and low side at the same time. My gauge on the blue, it's easier to see, but this gauge, which goes down to -30 PSI, I'm just going to let this thing go for about a minute. And once I open these valves up, let it run for about a minute. Once it gets down to the lowest part, that -30, I'm just going to turn the vacuum pump off and then let it sit there for a while. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on the vacuum, and we're going to hear it, but again, these are off, so it's only going to pull vacuum just up until right here. And by the way, I've oiled the vacuum and made sure, it's set up properly. Okay, so the vacuum's running. It's pretty quiet. Now I'm going to do is start opening up my low side. You're going to hear the change in sound of the vacuum. And then I'm going to open the high side and just open these up. All right, well, it's actually a new day today. It's much nicer out, as you can see, so I'm outside working on this. Yesterday, I pulled the vacuum down to almost -30 pretty much and let it sit for a few hours. It looked like the needle might have moved a little bit. So what it tells me is that it's not leaking so profusely that I definitely need to repair something. It is a slow leak, and I just have not maintained that over the last few years, and so it leaked all out. I'm moving forward with recharging it. Even though there is a slow leak in it, I feel like just getting it recharged will probably last for a little while, and I also can leverage my leak detectant little tool that came with this kit to detect where the refrigerant might be leaking after I'm charged up. So I'm going to move forward with this. So everything's hooked back up the same as it was before, but instead of just pulling a vacuum for about a minute or so, I'm going to leave it running for about 30 to 45 minutes. And the reason for that is the vacuum pump running for that long will pull the moisture out of the system by actually boiling it out, because by doing the vacuum for that long, it'll actually heat it up and boil out any water or moisture in the system. But if the system was completely opened up and a part was repaired, you may have to replace the PAG oil that's in the compressor. But in this case, since I'm not actually opening anything up, it should just be fine to run the vacuum on it for that long. It'll boil off the water, but it shouldn't boil off the PAG oil that's in the compressor. So all I should have to do after this is just put in refrigerant. So that's what we're going to do. I've got the valves closed. Like I said, they're open over here. I'm going to go ahead and start the vacuum pump. And then we'll go ahead and open up our valves to start pulling in that vacuum. And then I'm going to move on to doing some other business for about 30 to 45 minutes. And then I'll come back and turn the vacuum pump off, and then we'll move to the refrigerant. Okay, at this point now, I have completed the vacuum for 45 minutes. What I did was I just tightened these valves back shut, and then I shut my vacuum pump off, and that's all I've done. Everything's still connected. So let's talk about refrigerant now. Now I'm about to add the refrigerant in here. I need to know what type and how much to add. There's a sticker right here, which I'll flash up on the screen. It's right here on the radiator shroud. And it says the type of refrigerant is R134a and at 0.950 kilograms. Well, let's multiply that by 1,000 to get the grams. That's 950 grams is what this compressor is capable of. Since our system was completely uncharged, we could probably put close to that at least back into it. Here's a couple examples of some of these cans here. This is one I just bought today. This is R134a and it has some stop leak in it. So I'm going to try that. Hopefully maybe this helps with the leak. And if you look, this is a 16-ounce can, but look at the gram size, 454, right? So if our total system can handle about 950 grams, we'll add this whole can plus about a little less than 500 more. And this, by the way, came from Menards, so you can buy this stuff literally anywhere. R134a is the most ubiquitous refrigerant right now for cars. Bought a couple of these at Walmart. These were 10 bucks, so they're much cheaper. That's a 340 gram or 12-ounce can. So we'll probably add that whole 16-ounce can plus a 12-ounce can plus about maybe a little less than 150 grams out of that third can, and I'll have a little kitchen scale where I can weigh it. Now, speaking of these cans as well, this gauge set could save you money if you're going to do this multiple times. If you look at pricing between just these refrigerant cans that don't have anything on them versus the ones with the quick recharge cans that have the gauge and the hose and all that, these tend to be about half the price. So you could definitely save money by having your own gauge set in the long run. One thing that came with this V4 kit is this can tap. So what I did was I unscrewed this tap all the way out, so it's all the way out and it's not tapped. And then we're going to thread this onto the can, our first can here, get it nice and seated. And then what I'm going to do is screw this down into the can. What that's going to do is it's going to pierce the can and tap it. But once I didn't realize that was going to pop up, but once I screw it all the way down, notice that it's tapped and now it's closed. I'm going to take the yellow hose off my vacuum pump. It's been about 10 or 15 minutes. It's a much slower process than I thought, but then again, I've never done a full recharge before. But as you can see, still got my can hooked up. Occasionally I'll give a little bit of a tip to it to let a little bit of the fluid in. You can kind of see that there's refrigerant in this little sight glass here. But really what I'm looking at is my high side gauge, and I'll just read it for you since I won't be able to get it on camera. But it started at about 90 psi, and now it's closer to about 140, 150 psi. But I expect when it's fully charged to be more like, around, again, it's a 70-degree day, maybe around 175, I think, something like that. So I'm just kind of feeling out the can to see when it's empty. It still feels like there's fluid in there, so I'll keep this going for another few minutes and see how far we can get. All right, well, I think I pretty much have emptied out this can. I've had to kind of been turning it upside down for a couple seconds at a time to get the compressor to draw it in. Otherwise, it just takes forever. So I'm going to go ahead and close off my low side. There's still refrigerant in there, you see. And my high side's still closed off. And I'm going to go ahead and disconnect the can. Now what I'm going to do, since the can is tapped, I can just simply open the tap up all the way out, and that way it'll reseal itself. The little rubber thing in there will reseal itself. So I'll pull the tap all the way out, then I can take my hose off, and again, put it far from your body because there's still going to be maybe a little pressure in here. Or maybe we can remove a little pressure by hitting, relieve a little pressure here. You can see some of that, stop leak. It's got that dye in it. And then we can take off our hose. Again, I'm going to keep it far from my face. So just to review, we're going to put our tap on our second can here. What I'm going to do is this time is I'm going to put this cap on this part of the tap here so it doesn't spray out on me like it did before. So I'll put my cap on. Now I'll go ahead, and again the tap is all the way loosened out. We'll go ahead and tap the can, or put it on the can. Nice and tight, okay? And we'll go ahead and twist our tap all the way in. Okay, it's all the way seated, so our can is now tapped, but it's shut off. So now I can remove our cap here. Again, we'll put our line on it. Our yellow line here. Make sure it's tight. Then what we'll do is we'll open the tap just like a turn and a half. That's it. And we'll take our screwdriver and we'll make sure we got pressure coming out here, and we'll bleed it. Again, put my face away from it. That's enough. So we bled it out. And then we can go ahead and open our low side back up. And start letting that into the system. Again, I'm watching my high side climb. Occasionally I might have to dump the can a little bit to get the liquid Freon into the gauge here, so that the compressor will pull it in. But usually when the can's fresh, you don't have to do that for a little bit. Just let it go for a bit. Well, okay, so we've got the second can pretty much done. I don't feel any more liquid in here. I've got the low side turned off. Both valves are now turned off. I'm gonna go ahead, disconnect this can. At this point, we've got just under 800 grams out of the 950 that we're capable of. So we really should put another 150 some grams in, but I'm gonna let it ride right here and just check it. Maybe I'll let it go for about a week and I'll check it and make sure everything's doing good. I took the temperature out of the vent. It's down by 40 degrees now, so it's looking really good. I'm gonna keep it a little bit low, and I'm gonna go ahead and disconnect everything. Like I said, I'll come back next week and check it again. If my pressure's still under 180 and everything's still looking good and nothing's leaking, then I'll go ahead maybe in a couple weeks and add that 150 grams out of that other can, and we'll call it done. But so far this has been a success. We've got good pressure there. We got about 35 pounds on the low side, and we're about 170 on the high side, 175. So those numbers seem about right. Again, I haven't looked up on the chart for temperature and humidity, but that seems about right. So I think so far this is looking good. So I'm going to cut that off right here. Well, hey everybody, welcome back. And it's been about 3 weeks, maybe even almost a month since the last segment that I did, and I'm kind of returning back to the car to do a follow-up on the refrigerant charge. In the intro of the video, I mentioned that you can just skip ahead to this part of the video, because what I'm going to be doing here is doing a partial charge of the system. In the first part of the video, I came here and I hooked up the gauges, and I had zero pressure because I let it go for so long that I had no more refrigerant in the system. Therefore, I had to do the vacuum pump and charge it all the way from the ground up. In this part of the video, we're just going to be charging it partially up, because maybe, the air conditioning isn't blowing as cold, but you do have pressure, so you don't have to do that first part of the video. But the reason I'm doing it this way is so I could show you how to recharge your system without knowing how much refrigerant is already in there, right? Because now I happen to have the luxury of knowing that, because in that first part, like I said, I started from the ground up, and I know I put in about 800 grams out of the total 950 grams that this system is capable of holding of refrigerant. I've got this 12 ounce or 340 gram can left, so I know I can put in up to 150 grams out of this into there before the system is completely full. But you wouldn't know that if you came already having pressure and knowing that your air conditioning is blowing as cold. So what I'm going to show you now is how we can use our pressures to determine whether we're full or not. And what's nice about it, since I know how much I need to put in, I can compare that with if I charge it up based on the pressures and then I reweigh my can, I can compare how much I added to what the pressure showed to see how accurate that is. So I think that'll be a very useful thing for you guys who are just trying to do a partial charge of your system. Now, I'm not going to show you how to where to buy these gauges, how to hook them up, the high and low side up to your car, and how to hook up your can tap and all that stuff. That'll be the first part of the video, so you can go and just review those particular pieces. But you can then skip back ahead when I start doing the whole vacuum pump thing and the whole full charge. So let's get started doing a partial recharge. Okay, so before we get started here, let's just show you the materials that I have here. Besides my 3-way gauge set that you saw hanging up in the car, I have a regular household thermometer because I want to see what the current temperature is. And as you can see here, it's about 85 degrees, I think on there, 85 degrees Fahrenheit. I also have a chart here. This is a R134a temperature pressure chart. And what this will do, I'll flash a digital picture up on a screen so you can see it more clearly, but this will give us an idea of, based on the current temperature of 85 degrees, which is right here, what should our low side pressures be and our high side pressure be on our gauge. So here it's saying at 85 degrees, it should be about 45 to 55 psi on our gauges on the low side and 225 to 250 on the high side. So as we're charging the system, we're going to make sure that we don't exceed those high numbers right there so that we don't overcharge or overfill the system. Then we have the can tap, and I will be tapping this 12-ounce can here. Now this is a 12-ounce can of refrigerant, which is 340 grams. But I actually weighed it with this little scale here, and it's the entire can weighs 15.43 ounces. So this will be a good test for our system here, is if we can get as we're adding this in, if we see that our low side or our low and high side pressures are around the top of these, like 55 psi and 250 psi at 85 degrees, then we know that we can stop filling it, and then we can weigh that can, and whatever the difference is how many ounces I've put into the car, and we'll translate that into grams. Like I said, I have the luxury of knowing that I charged it up previously to about 800 grams out of the total 950 that it's capable of. So let's get started getting that partial charge on. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and tap this can and hook it up to my yellow hose there. Of course, right now the car isn't running at the moment, but I'll go ahead and start the car up. And what I'm going to do is just simply get the yellow line set up on the can tap. These are still closed because we just want to read our pressures here. We don't want the yellow to go into any of these valves at the moment. So these valves are tightened clockwise and they're shut. And so once I tap the can, we'll open up the low side to start letting the refrigerant into the low side. And as we're doing that, we're going to look at our low side gauge, which is the PSI markings on this outside. Right now it says about, I don't know, 70 something. When it's off, the low side is going to be higher and the high side is going to be lower, but once we start it up and run it for a bit, these will even out. So what we're expecting to see is this to come down to, maybe in the 40s or 50s, and this will start jumping up closer to 200. But as we're filling it up, we want to keep an eye on those numbers. All right, well, hopefully you can hear me over the engine running. So if you're not familiar with the Volt, when you put the hood up and you start the car, the generator engine will run, despite the fact that the compressor, the AC compressor, is actually electric, but that's okay. What I did was I put the AC inside the car on max, and made sure it was max cool. The temperature was turned all the way down, so it's 60 degrees or whatever, and all the windows are down so that the temperature never gets cold in there, so the compressor is always trying to work. My current gauges now are leveled out. We've got about 40 on the low side and about 200 on the high side. Now again, my chart says at 85 degrees I should be closer to 55, well, just under 55 on the low side. Don't go over that, and don't go over 250 on the high side. So our numbers here does not to exceed 55 on the low and 250 on the high. Yeah, I tapped my can, get my line on. I ran the tap all the way in. So now what I'm going to do is, to get ready for it to start, putting in, I'm going to loosen the tap just about a turn and a half, maybe a turn and a half, 2 turns, and that opens it up. And then before we open up our low side and start letting it in, we're going to go ahead and bleed it a little bit just to make sure that we've got all the air out of the line here. So let's go ahead and do that. I was having problems tapping my other can, which I had no problems with before, but this time I did. So I went to the auto parts store, bought a different kind of can. Well, interestingly enough, is this style can is the resealing kind, and it needs this adapter. Notice I have this little blue adapter, so that was a separate little $4 part that I had to buy, and it adapts the old style needle type thing to this resealable pin style one. So that may have been my problem before. I don't know how it worked before, but anyway, I had to buy that little $4 part for this can, and that seems to work. I'm able to now bleed it out, and I know it's tapped. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and get my car started back up again, and we'll move forward. Yeah, so the compressor's going. Once again, we're at 40 PSI there and about 200 right there. Actually, since my first segment, the temperature dropped a little bit, so now we're right at 80 degrees. So our new max points are 50 on the low side and 210 on the high. Yeah, so 50 on the low side and 210 on the high. So that's a little bit different. Let's go ahead and start putting some charge in. I've got the can tapped. I'm going to open up the low side to start letting some of the refrigerant in. Our low side is just under, it's just a little bit above 40, so we'll just keep working a little bit in. Okay, well my low side still is just around 40, which is in the range of 40 to 50. The high side, 210, 215 is about right for my high side. So I'm going to stop there and see how much I added. All right, well, I closed off my low side. I took my can off the tap here, and it's back on the scale here. I re-weighed the new can here with the adapter cap on here. Again, just be aware you might have to buy a different kind of adapter for your can tap, whether it's a piercing style or this self-healing one, whatever. With the adapter on there, I weighed it originally at 446, and I did that in grams. Now we're at 316 grams. So that's a difference of about 130 grams. And we knew we were just shy of about 150, so yeah, we're about 20 grams off. But as you can see, our at 80 degrees here on this line, we were still at about 40 psi on the low side, and we got to about 210, 215 on the high side. So I didn't want to go much higher than that, but we were within 20 grams of the max fill. So I'm going to leave it there, and I feel good about that. Well, I'm happy with that. It looks like our AC is blowing cold now, and it feels real good. Not only that, but all the codes are cleared, and we are 100% working again. Like I said, I made sure I waited a few weeks to make sure that I still had good pressure and everything from the initial charge was working, and now we are fully topped off, or at least close to topped off, and I'm happy with that. So I hope you learned something. If you have any comments or questions, let me know. Thanks for watching.